In Joshua chapter 24, you read the story about Joshua at the end of his life. So he has at this point already led the children of Israel after the death of Moses into the promised land. They crossed the Jordan River. God stopped the flow of the Jordan River so they could walk across on dry ground, went into the promised land. God drove out all the nations before them. And at this point in the story, they've taken possession of the promised land and they're living in cities they didn't build, and they're eating and drinking wine from vineyards and orchards that they didn't plant, and they're just enjoying this land that flows with milk and honey, just like God had promised them, and so at this point in the story, Joshua knows that he's about to die, and so he gathers up all the elders and the judges and the leaders of Israel into one place with all the people, and then he begins to tell them, listen, thus says the Lord, okay, I called your father Abraham out of Ur of the Chaldeans. And he begins to just rehearse the history of the Jewish people for them, all the ways that God had shown up for them, all the ways that he had promised and then fulfilled his promises, all the ways that he had shown himself to be strong on their behalf and protected them and kept them safe and led them through the whole wilderness, all the things he did, leading them across the Red Sea, providing for them in the wilderness, bringing water from a rock for them to drink, manna on the ground every morning when they woke up, their sandals and clothing never wearing out, and then of course leading them into the promised land itself. And he says, therefore, like basically based on everything God has done for you, based on how he has shown himself to be true, based on how he has made himself known as your God and chosen you as his people, based on all of that, fear the Lord and serve him faithfully. Okay, and basically to break it down, he says, look, if it seems evil to you to serve the Lord, then choose for yourself this day who you're going to serve. He's like, basically make a choice, you got 1 foot in and 1 foot out. It's like you're meddling over here, you're playing around like you follow God over here. But he's like, make a choice, if you're going to serve the gods of Egypt, the fake idols and gods they served in Egypt, then serve them. If you're going to serve the gods of this culture, the area where you're living in now, the Amorites, and, follow all that stuff, and, then do that. But as for me and my house, we're going to serve the Lord, okay? And I think that this is a choice that we all at some point are confronted with, right? You may have grown up even in a Christian home. Maybe your mom and dad took you to church. Maybe your grandparents were believers. Maybe you were in Sunday school. Maybe you went to youth group as a teenager. Maybe you had experiences with God up at summer camp. Maybe he showed himself to you. He made himself real to you. You know that he at one point chose you and put his hand upon you and revealed himself to you, that you can remember that touch of God on your life. But at this point now, you're not a kid anymore. You're not in Sunday school. You're not in youth group, and you're not at summer camp anymore. And you've grown up. You're an adult now. Okay, maybe you're married. Maybe you've got kids of your own at this point. But you know that you're not walking with God, and you're kind of, maybe you have 1 foot in, 1 foot out. Maybe you got both feet out. I mean, I don't know. But there comes a point when God kind of taps you on the shoulder, right? And he says, okay, it's time, make a choice. What are you going to do? And I even had that choice, right? I mean, I did go to Sunday school as a kid. My mom took us to church. That was before my dad was a Christian. My mom took me and my sisters to church. I went to Sunday school. I went to kids camp, summer camp. I had a couple of youth events I did. And through my childhood, I know for a fact that God made himself known to me personally. In my grandfather's living room, I believe that day God regenerated me. He took out my heart of stone, put in its place a heart of flesh. He made me his own and called me to himself that day when my grandpa was praying over me in his living room when I was a little boy. I met him again at that camp. And multiple other points. I remember being a kid and reading this Bible that my Sunday school teachers had given me, Mr. and Mrs. Chadwick, in the 3rd grade. And I only know that because their names are written in the front of my Bible. But I remember being a kid and reading that Bible. I remember praying and talking to God. I remember wanting to be his most faithful servant and being a good Christian, follow him. I remember that as a kid. But we stopped going to church when I was a kid, and maybe around 9 or 10 or so, through junior high, high school, I definitely wandered. I definitely drifted. I think if you had asked me around 16, 17 years old, like, what do you believe about God and the Bible and Jesus? I probably would have said, I don't know. I don't really know for sure. I got questions. What about science? What about, evolution? What about dinosaurs and the Big Bang Theory and, the origins of the universe? And like, what about all that? But honestly, if I'm going to be totally honest with you, like I knew better. I knew that there was a God. I was at no point, I wouldn't have ever called myself an atheist, maybe an agnostic, right? But at the same time, I also knew that God had touched my life. It's like I couldn't deny what he had done in my childhood years. And so it probably wasn't until I was about 22 years old, I was actually hanging out with my buddy Mike. We were in his truck driving out to the desert. We were going to shoot guns for the day. And he started telling me about this Bible study he was going to, David Hawking out in Tustin. And he was talking to me about what he was learning and what the pastor was saying and stuff like that. And I'm like, that's cool, man. I don't know about all that stuff. I went to church as a kid. I got some questions, and, so we talked a little bit, and I kind of played that off with him, and that was true. I did have questions and stuff, but what's funny is that God used that conversation to begin to wake me up, And I went home that night, pulled out that old Bible from Mr. and Mrs. Chadwick. I opened it up to the Gospel of Matthew. I don't remember exactly the passage I read that night, but I do remember I read a little bit in the Gospel of Matthew. And I mean, to be perfectly honest, I read it and then closed the Bible, and I was like, okay, well, that's the Bible. I read it. I didn't really understand it. But anyway, at that time I had a business. I drove around for work. And so the next day I'm driving around in my truck and turn the radio on. And I'm flipping through stations. I'm trying to find something to listen to. And all of a sudden, as I'm flipping stations, I hear this guy reading the same passage that I had just read the night before and didn't really understand. I'm like, whoa, that's kind of weird, So I turned it up, and I'm just, driving along and doing my day and listening to this guy. And what he did is he just basically read that passage and just explained through the whole passage. And at the end of it, I'm like, whoa, that was crazy. Like, what a coincidence, And so I just left it on that station. I think I listened to a couple of other things that day. But at that night, I went home, opened the Bible again, read some more. The next day, the same thing happened. This went on for a couple of weeks. And finally, one day, I'm on the 91 freeway at the 55 in the city of Orange. I was going to exit at Lincoln Avenue. And I was listening to this guy named Greg Laurie. And at the end of his message, he basically just said, hey, look, wherever you are, if you're driving down the road, if you're in your home, whatever, if you're on the road, just pull over someplace safe with me right now if you'd like to surrender your life to Jesus. And so, I did. I pulled into this parking lot at Vaughn's, shut my truck off, closed my eyes, and I just started to pray. And I asked God to save me. I asked him to forgive me for my sin. And I surrendered my heart, my life to Jesus in that moment. And I mean, I was in my truck praying and I was crying, and God was touching my life right then. He was touching my heart right now, and he was calling me back to himself. And I felt his presence with me in that truck. I didn't feel judgment. I didn't feel fear. I didn't feel like he was angry with me. In fact, I felt like he was being gentle, like he was gentle and kind and gracious and loving. I felt his presence with me, and it just broke me. And it's funny, from that moment, something clicked, something changed in me, and I was on fire. I was all about him. In fact, there was a little church across the street from there, and the next Sunday I was there. Like when church service started, I was there. I was sitting in the pews, and I was just waiting for the pastor at the end to, invite somebody to come up and receive salvation. I mean, even though I'd already done it right in my truck, but I couldn't wait. I wanted to go because I wanted to make sure. I want to make sure God knew I'm serious about this, and I wanted to do it in front of other people, right? So everyone knew I am his. I belong to him. And so that was my day of decision in the truck right there, where God called me. It's like I knew better. I knew him. He made himself known to me. He did touch my life. I had gone forward. I had prayed a prayer. I had known him. And now I'm walking like as if I don't, and just chasing after the things that the culture tells me to chase after, and desiring the things that the culture told me to desire, and valuing things the culture told me to value. And now it's like, okay, I'm him. It's like, God, choose this day whom you're going to serve. You're going to keep chasing after the gods of the culture? You're going to keep sitting on the throne of your own heart? Or are you going to surrender your heart to me? Are you going to trust me with your life and with your future and with your salvation? And so I just feel like there's probably somebody that's going to hear this message, hearing me talk right now, that is in that same place in your life. You knew God as a kid. You knew him. He made himself known to you. He revealed himself to you. He called you as his own, and he changed your heart, and you know it. Maybe it was in Sunday school. Maybe it was in youth group. Maybe it was at youth camp. Maybe it was because of some hard thing you went through, but you know him. And now you're an adult. Now you're a grown person, and you're in life, and God's telling you right now, you know what? You've walked long enough with one foot in and one foot out. And today I'm calling you to make a decision. Are you going to follow me or not? If it seems evil to you to trust and serve the Lord, then choose for yourself who you're going to serve. Are you going to follow the culture? Are you going to do whatever it tells you to do? Whatever the world tells you, whatever your culture tells you, are you going to follow your heart? Are you gonna serve sexuality? Are you gonna make that an idol for you? Are you gonna serve, achievement and fame and money and possessions and status in this world? Or are you going to serve the Lord, your God, your Father in heaven, who called you from before the foundation of the world to be holy and blameless before him? What are you gonna do? But it's time to make a decision. Amen. Choose for yourself this day who you will serve. But as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord.